Did you know people once paid to drink gladiator blood for strength? Or that doctors prescribed heroin syrup to cure a child's cough? We trust modern medicine. We go to the doctor for antibiotics, not for a good bleeding. We expect a sterile operating room, not a back alley drill to our skull. But it wasn't always this way. For most of human history, medicine was a desperate, terrifying guessing game. The line between a cure and a poison was blurry. Sometimes the cure was the poison. The things we did to our bodies in the name of health are shocking. They show our fear of death, our misunderstanding of disease, and our incredible, often misplaced hope. What happens when the cure is worse than the disease? How did we ever survive? Your number 18. What if drilling a hole in your head was the cure for a headache? It sounds like a horror movie plot, but for thousands of years, it was a real medical procedure. It's called trepanation. And it is exactly what it sounds like. A person would take a sharp stone or a metal tool and carve, scrape, or drill a hole into another person's skull while they were still alive. This is one of the oldest surgical procedures we know about. Archaeologists have found trepanned skulls all over the world, from Europe to South America. Some date back to the Neolithic period, more than 7,000 years ago. These were people living in the Stone Age. They didn't have sterile instruments or anesthesia. Yet, they were performing brain surgery. Why would they do this? The evidence suggests a few reasons. The main one was probably to relieve pressure on the brain. A serious head injury can cause the brain to swell. This swelling inside the rigid skull is incredibly dangerous. It can lead to brain damage and death. Releasing that pressure by drilling a hole could, in theory, save a person's life. We find many skulls with fractures near the trepanation hole, which supports this idea. But there was another, more common reason. People believed that headaches, seizures, and mental illness were caused by evil spirits trapped inside the head. The hole was a doorway. It was a way to let the demon out. It was a physical solution for a spiritual problem. The famous Greek physician Hippocrates wrote about trepanation around 400 BC. He described it as a treatment for head wounds. He even gave instructions on how to do it, advising doctors to drill slowly to avoid damaging the brain's protective membrane. And his writings show that this wasn't some fringe ritual. It was an accepted medical practice. In the Roman Empire, the physician Galen also documented the procedure, but the practice goes back much further. In the 19th century, an anthropologist named Paul Broca studied ancient skulls from Peru. He was shocked to find that many had undergone trepanation, and he was even more shocked to see evidence of healing around the edges of the holes. This meant the patients didn't just die on the table. Many of them survived the surgery. Some skulls even had multiple holes drilled at different times. These people went back for more. Survival rates are hard to pinpoint, but some studies suggest they could have been surprisingly high. Perhaps over 50% of patients lived through it. The procedure was done with care. Skulls show that surgeons avoided major blood vessels and sensitive areas of the brain. They knew more about anatomy than we give them credit for. They used tools like flint knives, obsidian scrapers, and later bronze drills called traphenes. It would have been excruciatingly painful. But for someone suffering from a blinding migraine or violent seizures, maybe any hope was worth the agony. The practice continued for centuries. It was still used in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. It only fell out of favor as our understanding of the brain and disease grew. Today, surgeons perform a modern version called a craniotomy to relieve brain swelling. They just don't do it to let the demons out. What we still don't know is truly unsettling. How did so many ancient cultures, separated by vast oceans and thousands of years, all arrive at the same bizarre solution of drilling a hole in the head? Without antibiotics or modern sanitation, how did they manage the terrifying risk of infection and an open wound leading directly to the brain? And when they spoke of releasing a spirit, what were they actually describing? And did the placebo effect of such a dramatic procedure play a bigger role in curing them than we can possibly imagine? Number 17. Could draining your blood really make you healthy? For over 2,000 years, the most common medical treatment in the world was bloodletting. If you were sick with almost any ailment, the doctor's first move was to make you bleed. It was the answer for everything. Fever, headache, pneumonia, depression, a broken heart. You name it, they'd bleed you for it. This wasn't a fringe idea. It was the foundation of Western medicine from the time of the ancient Greeks. until the late 19th century. Kings and peasants alike submitted to the lancet. The logic behind it came from the theory of the four humors. This theory was popularized by ancient Greek thinkers like Hippocrates and later perfected by the Roman physician Galen. They believed the human body was made of four basic substances, or humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. A healthy person had these four humors in perfect balance. Sickness was simply an imbalance. Usually, it was believed that the patient had an excess of one humor. Blood was the easiest to get to. So, if you had too much of it, the solution was simple: get some out. The goal was to restore balance and harmony to the body. There were several ways to do this. The most common was venesection, where a doctor would use a small, sharp knife called a lancet to slice open a vein, usually in the arm. The blood would drain into a bowl. The doctor would decide how much to take based on the patient's age, condition, and even the time of year and position of the stars. Another method was scarification, making small cuts on the skin, often combined with cupping. A heated glass cup was placed over the cuts. As it cooled, it created a vacuum that sucked the blood out. And of course, there were leeches. A doctor would place several leeches on the patient's skin. The leeches would latch on and drink their fill of blood, falling off when they were full. Each leech could consume several times its own weight in blood. This was so common that a whole profession grew around it. In the Middle Ages, bloodletting was often done by barber surgeons. These were barbers who also performed minor surgeries, pulled teeth, and most importantly, bled people. The iconic red and white barber's pole is a direct relic of this practice. The red represents the blood, and the white represents the bandages. The pole itself symbolizes the rod patients would grip to make their veins bulge. The practice was a part of everyday life. People would get bled regularly, like a modern-day health cleanse. But it was incredibly dangerous. Removing large amounts of blood weakens the body, especially a body that is already fighting off an illness. It can cause fainting, shock, and anemia, and in many cases it killed the patient. One of the most famous victims was probably George Washington. In 1799, the first U.S. president came down with a severe throat infection. Over the course of less than a day, his doctors bled him 4 times, removing an estimated 5 pints of blood. That's more than half the blood in an average adult male. He died shortly after. Many historians believe the aggressive bloodletting, not the infection, is what killed him. The practice finally began to die out in the late 19th century, when new scientific discoveries, like germ theory, proved that the 4 humors were nonsense. But the idea that you can purge the body of sickness held on for a very long time. So, what are the lingering questions? How did a medical theory with no basis in reality manage to dominate global medicine for more than 2 millennia, longer than any other theory in history? Given that bloodletting often made patients weaker, why did so many people swear by it, reporting that they felt better afterward? And perhaps most disturbingly, what widely accepted medical practice of today will be looked back on by future generations as our own version of bloodletting. Number 16, would you eat a dead body to cure your illness? It's a stomach-turning thought, but for centuries, a very popular form of medicine involved eating human remains. This wasn't some fringe ritual practiced by a lost tribe. This was mainstream European medicine, prescribed by doctors and sold by apothecaries from the Middle Ages all the way into the 18th century. It was called corpse medicine, and it was a huge business. People consumed ground-up human skull, drank blood, and used human fat as a topical ointment. They believed these substances held a powerful life force that could be transferred from the dead to the living. The most famous ingredient was mumia, or mummy powder. This was made from actual ancient Egyptian mummies. The mummies were stolen from their tombs, shipped to Europe, and ground into a fine dust. People believed the black, resinous substance used in mummification had magical healing properties. They mixed the powder into drinks to treat everything from headaches and coughs to epilepsy and internal bleeding. It became so popular that the demand for real Egyptian mummies outstripped the supply. So a grisly counterfeit market emerged. Unscrupulous merchants would take the bodies of executed criminals, vagrants, or plague victims, stuff them with bitumen, and dry them in the sun to create fake mummies to sell to apothecaries. But it wasn't just ancient mummies. Fresher was often considered better. The skull of a person who had died a violent death was thought to be especially potent. The idea was that their life force was snuffed out suddenly, so it was still concentrated in their bones. A powder made from such a skull, sometimes called occipital bone moss, was a prized cure for epilepsy and other neurological disorders. King Charles II of England had his own personal recipe called the King's Drops, a tincture of alcohol and powdered human skull that he took for seizures. And then there was the blood. The ancient Romans believed that drinking the warm blood of a freshly killed gladiator could cure epilepsy. The gladiator's strength and vitality, they thought, would be passed on to the drinker. In 16th and 17th century Europe, this tradition continued. People would gather at public executions with cups in hand, ready to pay the executioner for a drink of the condemned person's blood. It was seen as the ultimate cure for seizures. If you couldn't get it fresh, you could buy it dried and powdered. Human fat was another popular remedy. It was rendered from the bodies of the dead and sold as an ointment for aches, pains, and gout. Executioners had the rights to the bodies of those they killed, and they would often dismember them and sell the parts for medical use. The fat was a particularly profitable byproduct. This wasn't cannibalism in the traditional sense. People weren't eating human flesh for sustenance. They saw it as medicine. The body was just a container for powerful substances. The practice was championed by famous physicians like Paracelsus, a 16th century Swiss doctor who believed in using like to cure like. In his view, a human body part was the best medicine for a sick human. The practice only faded as the scientific revolution took hold and our understanding of anatomy and disease became more sophisticated. The questions that remain are deeply unsettling. What does it say about human nature that for centuries the most civilized societies in Europe saw the bodies of the dead not as something to be respected, but as a commercial resource to be harvested and consumed? How did the medical establishment justify this practice, and how did ordinary people overcome the natural revulsion to consuming their own kind? And if we were so wrong about something so fundamental, what are the blind spots in our own modern medicine that will horrify people in the future? Number 15. Could a simple ice pick to the brain fix your mind? The idea is brutal. A surgeon takes a long, sharp instrument, like an ice pick, hammers it through the thin bone of the eye socket and into the front part of the brain. Then they wiggle it around to sever the connections. This was the transorbital lobotomy. And from the 1930s to the 1950s, it was considered a miracle cure for mental illness. Tens of thousands of people around the world were subjected to this procedure. Many of them were left permanently brain damaged, emotionally blunted, or in a vegetative state. The story of the lobotomy begins with a Portuguese neurologist named Egas Moniz. In 1935, he heard about a study where chimpanzees became more placid after having their frontal lobes removed. He theorized that mental illness in humans might be caused by fixed circuits in the brain. If he could just cut those circuits, he could cure the patient. He developed a procedure called a leucotomy, where he drilled holes in the side of the skull and injected alcohol into the frontal lobes to destroy the tissue. The results were mixed, but Moniz declared it a success. In 1949, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for his discovery. But it was an American neurologist named Walter Freeman who turned the lobotomy into a widespread and terrifying phenomenon. Freeman believed Moniz's procedure was too slow and complicated. He wanted a method that was fast, cheap, and could be done without a traditional operating room. In 1946, he perfected the transorbital lobotomy. He used an actual ice pick from his kitchen as a prototype for his new instrument, the orbitoclast. The procedure was horrifyingly simple. The patient was often rendered unconscious with electroshock. Freeman would then lift the eyelid, place the point of the orbitoclast under the eyelid and against the top of the eye socket, and tap it with a mallet to break through the bone. He would then sweep the instrument back and forth to sever the nerve fibers connecting the frontal lobes to the rest of the brain. He would then repeat the process on the other side. The whole thing took about 10 minutes. Freeman was a showman. He traveled the country in a van he called the lobotomobile, demonstrating his technique at mental asylums. He performed thousands of lobotomies himself, sometimes doing dozens in a single day. He didn't require a sterile environment or surgical assistance. He saw it as a simple office procedure. He promoted it as a cure for everything from schizophrenia and severe depression to anxiety and simple unruliness. Thousands of patients were lobotomized for reasons that seem shocking today. They were rebellious teenagers, anxious housewives, or emotionally troubled war veterans. One of the most famous cases was Rosemary Kennedy, the sister of President John F. Kennedy. She was lobotomized in 1941 at the age of 23 for her mood swings and rebellious behavior. The procedure left her with the mental capacity of a toddler. and she spent the rest of her life institutionalized. The lobotomy didn't cure mental illness, it just destroyed a part of the brain responsible for personality, emotion, and complex thought. It often made patients docile, placid, and easier to manage. For overcrowded and underfunded asylums, this was seen as a good outcome. The patient might be cured of their agitation, but they were also stripped of their identity. The practice began to decline rapidly in the mid-1950s with the development of the first effective antipsychotic drugs like Thorazine. Medicine finally had a better way to treat mental illness, but the legacy of the lobotomy is a dark chapter in medical history, a reminder of our brutal and simplistic attempts to understand the human mind. The questions that linger are chilling. How could the medical community and society at large embrace such a barbaric procedure so enthusiastically, even awarding its inventor a Nobel Prize? What does the story of the lobotomy tell us about our desperation to fix people who don't conform to social norms? And are our modern treatments for mental illness, from powerful psychotropic drugs to electroconvulsive therapy, truly as advanced and humane as we believe them to be, or are they just a more subtle form of control? Number 14. Would you drink poison if a doctor told you it was medicine? For hundreds of years, one of the most prescribed medicines for a wide range of illnesses was mercury. Yes, the same toxic heavy metal that we now know causes severe neurological damage, kidney failure, and death. Doctors in ancient Persia, China, and Europe all used it. The famous Renaissance physician Paracelsus was a huge proponent. He believed that poison in small doses could be a powerful medicine. He was right in some cases, but with mercury he was tragically wrong. Mercury's most famous use was as a treatment for syphilis. From the late 15th century until the early 20th century, it was the only game in town. Syphilis was a devastating disease causing horrific sores, insanity, and eventually death. People were desperate, so they turned to mercury. It was administered in several ways, all of them awful. Many patients might drink it in a liquid solution, they might have it rubbed into their skin as an ointment, or they might sit in a box with their head sticking out while mercury was heated below, forcing them to inhale the toxic fumes. This was called fumigation. The treatment was brutal. A common side effect was excessive salivation. Patients would drool uncontrollably, sometimes producing several pints of saliva a day. This was seen as a sign that the mercury was working, that it was purging the disease from the body. Other side effects included hair and tooth loss, gum disease, muscle tremors, and severe cognitive decline. This was known as Mad Hatter disease, because hat makers in the 19th century used mercury to treat felt and often suffered from its neurological effects. Many patients who underwent mercury treatment for syphilis could be summed up by the grim saying of the day, "One night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury." The treatment often lasted for years, and it's likely that many patients died from mercury poisoning rather than from the syphilis itself. But mercury wasn't just for syphilis, it was a cure-all. It was a key ingredient in teething powders for babies, which tragically poisoned many infants. It was also found in laxatives. A popular patent medicine called blue mass pills contained a large dose of mercury. Abraham Lincoln was known to take these pills for his bouts of melancholy, but he stopped when he realized they made him fly into a rage. Many famous historical figures, including King Ivan the Terrible of Russia and the composer Robert Schumann, were treated with mercury and likely suffered from its toxic effects. Why was it so popular? For one, it did have some effect. Mercury can kill the bacteria that causes syphilis. The problem is that the dose required to kill the bacteria is also high enough to kill the patient. But in an age without antibiotics, even a slight improvement was seen as a miracle. It was a case of the cure being just as bad, if not worse, than the disease. The use of mercury as a primary treatment for syphilis only ended in the 1910s, with the development of the first true antibiotic, salvarsan, which was itself an arsenic-based compound. And it was finally made obsolete with the widespread availability of penicillin in the 1940s. The history of mercury as medicine raises some deeply troubling questions. How could doctors continue to prescribe a known poison for centuries, even as they watched their patients suffer from its horrific side effects? What does our willingness to embrace such a toxic cure say about the sheer terror that diseases like syphilis inspired in people? And are there any common over-the-counter substances we use today that future generations will look back on with the same horror we feel when we think of mercury pills? Number 13. What if the secret to beauty was also a deadly poison? Arsenic. The word itself sounds sinister. It's famous as a poison, the weapon of choice in countless mystery novels and historical assassination. But for a long time, arsenic was also a popular medicine and a beauty product. People willingly and sometimes secretly consumed small amounts of this deadly substance in the belief that it would cure them of disease and make them more beautiful. It was a high-stakes gamble with their lives. In the 18th and 19th centuries, arsenic was a key ingredient in many patent medicines. The most famous was Dr. Fowler's solution. Invented in 1786, it was a 1% solution of potassium arsenite. It was prescribed for a staggering number of ailments: malaria, asthma, syphilis, cancer, and skin conditions like eczema and psoriasis. It was one of the most popular medicines of the Victorian era. It did seem to have some effects on certain conditions like leukemia, but it was also a cumulative poison. The arsenic would build up in the body over time, leading to weakness, confusion, vomiting, skin lesions, and eventually a painful death. But arsenic's most peculiar use was in cosmetics. Victorian women prized a pale, almost translucent complexion. It was a sign of wealth and refinement, a signal that you didn't have to work in the sun. To achieve this look, some women would eat small wafers containing arsenic. It was sold under brand names like Dr. Mackenzie's medicated arsenic complexion wafers. The arsenic worked by destroying red blood cells, which induced a state of anemia, giving the skin a deathly pallor. It also caused a slight swelling of the face, which smoothed out wrinkles. For a short time, a woman might look fashionably pale and youthful. But the long-term effects were devastating. It caused hair loss, goiters, vision problems, and a type of skin discoloration that left the user with a ghostly gray-brown complexion. It was the opposite of the intended effect. There were also arsenic-laced face powders and lotions, and in a particularly dangerous practice, some women would use arsenic-based drops to dilate their pupils, believing it made their eyes look larger and more luminous. Of course, this also led to light sensitivity and eventually blindness. The practice of arsenic eating became something of a fad in certain regions, like Styria in Austria. The Styrian arsenic eaters claimed that consuming the poison and gradually increasing doses helped them with their breathing in the high altitudes and gave them a robust, healthy appearance. They would build up a tolerance that would shock outsiders, but they were still poisoning themselves. If they tried to stop, they would suffer from intense and often fatal withdrawal symptoms. The danger of arsenic was well known. It was a common ingredient in rat poison and was frequently used for murder because it was hard to detect in a post-mortem examination before the development of the Marsh test in 1836. Yet, it continued to be sold openly in pharmacies as both medicine and a cosmetic aid well into the 20th century. The line between poison, medicine, and beauty product was dangerously thin. People were literally dying to be beautiful. This strange chapter in history leaves us with some unnerving questions. Why are we so often willing to risk our health for the sake of conforming to a fleeting standard of beauty? How could a society be so aware of a substance's deadly properties in one context, murder, while simultaneously marketing it as a health product in another? And in our modern world of Botox, extreme plastic surgery, and a multi-billion-dollar supplement industry, have we really moved beyond the dangerous pursuit of a physical ideal, or have we just found more sophisticated poisons? Number 12, could drinking your own waste actually be good for you? This is one of the most cringe-inducing ideas in the history of medicine. It's called urine therapy or urophagia, and it is the practice of drinking your own urine for its supposed health benefits. It's an ancient practice mentioned in texts from India, Rome, and Egypt. And while it has always been on the fringe, it has had surprising staying power, with proponents still advocating for it today. The central idea is that urine is not a waste product, but a sterile, distilled version of your own blood, full of valuable nutrients, hormones, and antibodies that your body has foolishly discarded. By drinking it, you are supposedly giving your body a second chance to absorb these vital elements. The historical record is full of references to the medicinal use of urine. The ancient Romans reportedly used it as a mouthwash to whiten their teeth and freshen their breath. The ammonia in aged urine does have bleaching and antiseptic properties, so there is a strange logic to it, however disgusting. In 17th century England, it was a common folk remedy. People would drink their own urine to treat jaundice. They would also use it as a topical wash for skin sores, and wounds. There was a belief that the urine of a healthy person could cure a sick person, or that the first urine of the morning was the most potent. In the early 20th century, the practice got a modern-day champion in a British naturopath named John W. Armstrong. During World War I, he claimed to have cured himself of tuberculosis by fasting and drinking only his own urine for 45 days. After this, he became a zealous advocate for urine therapy. He wrote a book in 1944 called The Water of Life, a treatise on urine therapy, which became the foundational text for the modern movement. Armstrong claimed that urine could cure virtually all major diseases, from gangrene to cancer. He argued that it was the body's own perfect medicine, a self-produced vaccine that could boost the immune system and destroy diseased tissue. The science, however, does not support these claims. Urine is about 95% water. The other 5% is a mix of urea, creatinine, salts, and other waste products that the kidneys have worked hard to filter out of the bloodstream. It is the body's liquid trash. While it is mostly sterile when it leaves the body, it is not a source of valuable nutrients. Reintroducing these waste products forces your kidneys to work even harder to filter them out again. And while there are trace amounts of hormones and other substances, they are in such tiny quantities that they have no therapeutic effect. Any reported benefits from urine therapy are almost certainly due to the placebo effect or the simple act of increased hydration from the water content. Despite the lack of scientific evidence, the practice persists. It's often promoted as a natural cure that they don't want you to know about. It taps into a deep-seated mistrust of mainstream medicine and a desire for simple, self-sufficient solutions. People have tried it for everything from allergies to AIDS, often with no effect and sometimes with harmful consequences like dehydration or infection if the urine becomes contaminated with bacteria after leaving the body. It remains a stark example of how far people will go in search of a cure, and how easily a bizarre idea can take root and survive for centuries. The thought of this practice raises some fundamental questions. What is it about the human psyche that can be convinced to consume something our bodies are explicitly designed to expel? How does an idea with no scientific backing manage to survive and even thrive for thousands of years, passed down through folk traditions and modern-day wellness gurus? And does the persistence of urine therapy reveal a fundamental flaw in our ability to distinguish between a natural remedy and a dangerous delusion? Number 11. Would you use animal droppings as medicine? Before we understood germ theory, the world was a very different place. The concept of microscopic organisms causing disease was completely unknown. In this world, the line between filth and medicine was often non-existent. One of the most common ingredients in ancient medical kits was animal dung. Doctors in Egypt, Greece, India, and across medieval Europe all prescribed remedies made from the feces of animals like crocodiles, dogs, donkeys, and gazelles. They believed these substances had powerful healing properties. The ancient Egyptians were particularly fond of dung-based medicine. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest medical texts in the world, dating to around 1550 BC, contains numerous recipes that include animal excrement. It was used as a key ingredient in poultices and ointments for treating wounds and skin lesions. The logic, as strange as it seems, might have been based on observation. They saw that animal dung, when left to dry, often grew mold. In a world without antibiotics, it's possible that some of these molds, like those that produce penicillin, had some mild antibacterial properties. So, a dung poultice might have occasionally worked, but for all the wrong reasons. The risk of introducing deadly bacteria like tetanus into an open wound was, of course, enormous. Perhaps the most famous use of dung was as a contraceptive. The Kahun Gynecological Papyrus, an even older Egyptian text, describes a contraceptive pessary made from crocodile dung mixed with honey and other substances. A woman was to insert this mixture into her vagina before intercourse. The thinking was that the thick, acrid paste would form a physical barrier, preventing sperm from reaching the egg. Crocodile dung is slightly alkaline, which might have had a mild spermicidal effect. But again, the risk of causing a serious vaginal or uterine infection was incredibly high. It was a dangerous and smelly form of birth control. The practice wasn't limited to ancient Egypt. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder recommended the ash of burnt dog dung as a treatment for eye ailments. In medieval Europe, the dung of a pig was sometimes used to stop a nosebleed. These weren't just folk remedies practiced by villagers, they were prescribed by respected physicians. The idea was often tied to the concept of sympathy or like cures like. For example, a substance that smelled bad might be thought to drive away evil spirits that caused disease. The use of animal dung as medicine highlights our complete and utter desperation before the advent of modern science. When you have no idea what causes infection, you'll try anything. If a wound treated with a dung poultice happened to heal without getting infected, it was seen as proof that the treatment worked. The failures were just chalked up to the will of the gods or the severity of the illness. It took the discoveries of scientists like Louis Pasteur and Joseph Lister in the 19th century to finally show the world that filth and germs were the cause of disease, not the cure. This was a revolutionary idea that turned thousands of years of medical practice on its head. This history of fecal pharmacology forces us to ask some uncomfortable questions. How many people throughout history died from infections caused by the very medicines that were meant to heal them? What does it tell us about our ability to mistake correlation for causation, seeing a cure where there is only a coincidence? And in our modern obsession with natural remedies, are we at risk of repeating the same mistake, embracing unproven and potentially harmful substances simply because they come from a non-pharmaceutical source? Number 10. Could glowing in the dark be a sign of good health? At the beginning of the 20th century, the world was captivated by a newly discovered element, radium. Discovered by Marie and Pierre Curie in 1898, this radioactive substance seemed almost magical. It glowed in the dark, and it gave off a mysterious energy. People were fascinated. And in the rush of excitement, before its deadly properties were fully understood, a huge health craze was born. People started to believe that radiation in small doses was not just harmless, but incredibly good for you. It was seen as a way to energize the body and cure all manner of diseases. This led to the creation of a wide range of radioactive quack products. There were radium-laced chocolates, breads, and toothpastes. There were radioactive face creams that promised a youthful glow. But the most famous and dangerous product was radium-infused water. Companies marketed devices like the Revigator, a ceramic water crock lined with carnotite, an ore containing radium and uranium. People were encouraged to fill the crock with water every night and drink the radioactive radon water throughout the day for good health. The advertisements claimed it could cure arthritis, gout, and senility, and restore youthful vigor. One of the most prominent promoters of this idea was a man named William J. Bailey. He was a Harvard dropout who falsely claimed to be a doctor. He created a popular radium water product called Radithor. It was essentially distilled water with tiny amounts of 2 radium isotopes dissolved in it. Bailey marketed it as a cure for the living dead and claimed it could treat over 150 different ailments. He became a very rich man. One of his best customers was a wealthy industrialist and amateur golf champion named Eben Byers. In 1927, after an arm injury, Byers' doctor recommended Radithor. Byers became a convert. He believed it gave him energy and improved his health. He drank several bottles of it every day for about 3 years. He even gave it to his friends and his racehorses, but by 1930 he started to feel sick. His teeth were falling out, his jaw was disintegrating, the radium he had been drinking was depositing in his bones, just like calcium, and blasting his tissues with intense, localized radiation. He was diagnosed with radium poisoning. His condition was horrific. Parts of his jaw had to be surgically removed. Holes were forming in his skull. He died a slow, agonizing death in 1932. The Wall Street Journal ran a headline that captured the horror. The radium water worked fine until his jaw came off. Byers' gruesome death was a wake-up call. It led to a public outcry and gave the federal government more power to regulate patent medicines. The radioactive health fad came to a crashing halt. The story of the Radium Girls, female factory workers who painted watch dials with glow-in-the-dark radium paint and suffered similar horrific bone decay, also helped expose the dangers. But, for a brief, shining moment, people truly believed that the secret to health was to consume a deadly radioactive poison. The radium era leaves us with some haunting questions. How can we as a society be so easily swept up in a craze for a new miracle substance before we fully understand its long-term consequences? What does it say about our desire for quick fixes that we were willing to drink radioactive water for a vague promise of vigor? And as we rush to embrace new technologies today, From genetic engineering to artificial intelligence, are we taking the time to fully consider the potential dangers, or are we just creating the Radathor of the 21st century? Number 9. What if your doctor prescribed you heroin for a cough? It sounds like a joke, but it's absolutely true. In 1898, the German pharmaceutical company Bayer, the same company that makes aspirin, launched a new wonder drug. It was a cough suppressant that they claimed was more effective than codeine, and most importantly, was non-addictive. They marketed it under the heroic-sounding brand name Heron. The drug was diacetylmorphine, a semi-synthetic opioid that is 2 to 3 times more potent than morphine. And it was a massive commercial success. Bayer marketed heroin aggressively to doctors and the public. It was sold as an over-the-counter syrup. Advertisements praised it as a miracle cure for coughs, colds, bronchitis, and even tuberculosis. It was especially popular for children. A mother could walk into a pharmacy and buy a bottle of Bayer's heroin to quiet her child's nagging cough. And it worked. It suppressed the cough reflex very effectively. The problem was that it was anything but non-addictive. In fact, it was one of the most addictive substances ever created. The body rapidly metabolizes heroin back into morphine, leading to a powerful rush of euphoria, followed by a strong desire to take more. For over a decade, heroin was a common ingredient in cough syrups and other medicines around the world. Your doctors prescribed it freely. Patients took it without any idea of its true nature. A generation of people were unknowingly turned into opioid addicts by their doctors and their cough medicine. People who had never touched an illicit drug in their lives found themselves physically dependent on their daily dose of medicine. They were medical addicts. The medical community started to notice the problem in the early 1900s. Reports began to surface of patients developing a heroin habit. Instead of curing morphine addiction, as some had initially hoped, it was creating a new, more severe form of addiction. By 1913, Bayer had stopped producing heroin. In 1914, the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act was passed in the United States, which began to regulate the sale of opioids and cocaine. And in 1924, the U.S. Congress banned the sale, importation, and manufacture of heroin altogether. But the damage was done. The genie was out of the bottle. The drug that was introduced to the world as a safe cough medicine had created a massive public health crisis and started the modern illicit heroin trade. The story of heroin cough syrup is a cautionary tale about the dangers of rushing a new drug to market without fully understanding its effects. Bayer was so focused on the drug's effectiveness as a cough suppressant that they either ignored or failed to see its incredible addictive potential. It's a stark reminder that even the most respected medical companies can make catastrophic mistakes. It also shows how a substance can be seen as a respectable medicine in one era and a dangerous street drug in the next. The line is often drawn by culture and law, not just by chemistry. This historical blunder raises some critical questions that are still relevant today. How do we balance the need for new, effective medicines with the risk of unforeseen side effects and addiction? In our current opioid crisis, which was fueled by the overprescription of legal pain medications, what lessons have we failed to learn from the heroin cough syrup debacle of a century ago? And when a trusted company and the medical establishment get something so profoundly wrong, how can the public ever be expected to make informed decisions about their own health? Number 8. Could cocaine be the solution for a child's toothache? Today, we see cocaine as a dangerous and illegal street drug. But in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, it was a celebrated wonder drug. It was legal, widely available, and hailed as a miracle cure for a variety of ailments. It was an ingredient in everything from throat lozenges and soft drinks to hay fever remedies and, most disturbingly, toothache drops for children. The idea of giving a child cocaine seems shocking now. But at the time, it was considered a safe and effective treatment. Cocaine was first isolated from the coca leaf in 1855. Its potent anesthetic properties were quickly recognized. It was a revolutionary discovery for medicine, especially for surgery. The famous psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud was an early and enthusiastic advocate. In his 1884 paper, Über Coca, he praised it as a magical substance that could cure depression, indigestion, and morphine addiction. He used it himself and prescribed it to his friends and patients. For a time, cocaine was seen as a panacea. This enthusiasm led to its inclusion in countless patent medicines. One of the most popular products was cocaine toothache drops. They were sold over the counter and were heavily marketed to parents. An advertisement from the period might show a picture of a smiling child, with a caption promising instantaneous cure. These drops contained a solution of cocaine that was applied directly to the sore tooth and gums. and they worked, at least in the short term. Cocaine is a powerful local anesthetic. It numbed the pain very effectively. A crying child would quickly quiet down, but the relief came at a high cost. Cocaine is also a powerful central nervous system stimulant and is highly addictive. Applying it to the gums allows it to be rapidly absorbed into the bloodstream. Your children who were given these drops were given a direct dose of a potent narcotic. This could lead to restlessness, increased heart rate, and anxiety, and with repeated use, it could lead to dependence and addiction. Parents were unknowingly dosing their children with a substance that we now know can have devastating effects on the developing brain. Cocaine wasn't just for toothaches. It was the secret ingredient in the original formula for Coca-Cola, which was marketed as a brain tonic and nerve stimulant. It was found in medicated wines like the popular Vin Mariani, which was endorsed by popes and presidents. It was praised by doctors and sold openly in pharmacies. It took several decades for the public and the medical community to fully recognize the dark side of this wonder drug. The reports of addiction, overdose, and dangerous side effects grew until they could no longer be ignored. Like heroin, cocaine was eventually brought under strict government control by the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act of 1914. The era of cocaine as a mainstream medicine was over. The story of cocaine toothache drops is a chilling reminder of how dramatically our understanding of drugs can change. How could society so completely misjudge the dangers of a substance, marketing it to the most vulnerable members of the population? What does this episode tell us about the power of marketing and the allure of a quick fix for common problems like pain? And in an age where we give children powerful psychoactive drugs for conditions like ADHD, have we truly learned our lesson? Or are we just repeating the same pattern with different substances? Number 7, would you let a blood-sucking worm crawl on your skin to heal you? Is leeches? For most people, the word conjures up images of slimy, blood-sucking swamp creatures. But for thousands of years, leeches were one of the most important tools in a doctor's bag. The practice of using leeches for medical purposes is called hydrotherapy. It was a common method of bloodletting, based on the same humoral theory that dominated Western medicine for centuries. The idea was that leeches could gently and painlessly remove the bad blood that was causing a patient's illness. The use of leeches in medicine is ancient. It's described in texts from ancient India, Greece, and Rome. But the practice reached its peak of popularity in the early 19th century, especially in Europe. This period was known as the time of leechmania. Doctors used leeches for everything. They were applied to treat headaches, fevers, pneumonia, and even mental illness. The demand was so high that it led to a shortage of the medicinal leech, Hirudo medicinalis. Leeches were harvested from the wild in massive numbers, and leech farms were established to keep up with the demand. France alone imported tens of millions of leeches every year during the 1830s. The procedure was simple. The doctor would place one or more leeches on the patient's skin near the affected area. The leech would attach itself with its 3 jaws, which are lined with hundreds of tiny teeth. The bite is largely painless because the leech's saliva contains a powerful anesthetic. The saliva also contains a potent anticoagulant called hirudin, which prevents the blood from clotting and allows the leech to feed uninterrupted. A single leech can consume up to 10 milliliters of blood, swelling to several times its original size. After it is full, it simply falls off. The wound will continue to bleed for several hours because of the hirudin, which was seen as a good thing, a further cleansing of the bad blood. With the fall of humoral theory and the rise of germ theory in the late 19th century, leeching fell out of favor. It came to be seen as a barbaric and useless relic of a more ignorant time. But this is one ancient treatment that has made a surprising comeback. Modern medicine has rediscovered the unique properties of the leech. Today, leeches are used in microsurgery, particularly for reattaching severed fingers, toes, or ears. When a small body part is reattached, it's often difficult to reconnect the tiny veins that drain blood away from the area. Arteries are easier to stitch, so blood can get in, but it can't get out. This leads to a buildup of congested blood, which can kill the reattached tissue. This is where the leech comes in. A leech applied to the area will drain the excess blood, relieving the congestion and allowing the veins time to regrow. The anticoagulant in its saliva also helps to promote blood flow. It's a remarkable example of nature providing a perfect solution to a complex medical problem. The FDA approved leeches as a medical device in 2004. So, while the old practice of using leeches to balance the humors was nonsense, the creature itself has proven to be a valuable medical tool. This unique story of a discredited ancient treatment finding a new, scientifically valid purpose in modern medicine is fascinating. But it also raises some interesting questions. How many other useless folk remedies or ancient practices might have a real but misunderstood scientific basis that we have yet to discover? What does the return of the leech tell us about the potential for finding valuable medical tools in the natural world? And as we develop more and more synthetic drugs and high-tech devices, are we at risk of overlooking the simple, elegant solutions that nature has already perfected? Number 6. What if the cure for your headache was a jolt from an electric fish? Long before we had batteries, or could generate electricity on demand, ancient physicians found a way to harness its power. They used a living generator, the electric fish. Several species of fish, like the electric eel of South America and the torpedo fish or electric ray of the Mediterranean, have the amazing ability to produce powerful electric shocks. The ancient Greeks and Romans knew about these fish, and they figured out a way to use them for medicine. This was one of the earliest forms of electrotherapy. The practice is first described in the writings of the Roman physician Scribonius Largus in the 1st century AD. He recommended it as a treatment for gout and chronic headaches, including migraines. The treatment was direct and, one would imagine, quite shocking. For a headache, the patient would have a live torpedo fish placed on their forehead. The fish would then be prodded until it discharged its electric shock, which could be up to 200 volts. The patient would remain there until their head was completely numb. For gout or arthritis in the feet, the patient would be instructed to stand on a live electric fish at the seashore until their entire leg was numb up to the knee. The logic was simple, even if the science wasn't understood. The powerful shock overwhelmed the nerves, creating a numbing effect that temporarily blocked the pain signals. It was a crude form of anesthesia. The physician Galen also wrote about this treatment, and it was used for centuries. The fish were seen as a magical source of healing power, a gift from the sea that could numb the most intractable pain. It was a treatment born of desperation. For someone suffering from the agony of a severe migraine or inflammatory arthritis, the prospect of a sharp, numbing shock might have been a welcome relief. The use of electric fish as a medical device faded over time, but the idea of using electricity to treat pain and other medical conditions did not. In the 18th century, with the invention of the Leyden jar and other devices that could store static electricity, electrotherapy had a major resurgence. Scientists and doctors began experimenting with electric shocks to treat everything from paralysis to depression. It became a popular, if not always effective, medical fad. Today we have a much more sophisticated version of this ancient practice. It's called transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation, or TENS. A TENS unit is a small battery-powered device that delivers low-voltage electrical currents to the skin through electrodes. It's commonly used to treat chronic pain. The electrical impulses are thought to interfere with the pain signals being sent to the brain. It's the same basic principle as the torpedo fish, just much more controlled and less terrifying. We also use electricity in more dramatic ways, like with defibrillators to restart the heart, and in electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, to treat severe depression. The ancient idea of using a jolt of electricity to reset the body's systems is still with us. The history of electric fish therapy is a fascinating look at the roots of modern electromedicine. It prompts us to wonder how many groundbreaking medical technologies of today have their origins in strange, seemingly magical practices from the ancient world. What does it say about human ingenuity that we were able to turn a dangerous sea creature into a medical tool thousands of years before we understood the science of electricity? And what other forces of nature are we currently overlooking that could hold the key to future medical breakthroughs? Number 5. Would you split a person's tongue to help them speak better? The tongue is a complex and vital organ, essential for speech, taste, and swallowing. The idea of intentionally cutting it is horrifying, yet, for a period in medical history, a procedure called tongue splitting, or glossectomy, was proposed and sometimes performed as a cure for stuttering. It was a brutal and misguided attempt to solve a complex neurological condition with a simple, violent surgical fix. Stuttering has been a documented condition for thousands of years, but its cause has always been a mystery. In the absence of a real understanding, people came up with all sorts of theories. Some thought it was caused by a problem with the tongue itself, that it was too thick, too long, or too sluggish. This anatomical theory led to the idea that if you could just surgically alter the tongue, you could cure the stutter. This idea gained some traction in the 19th century. A German surgeon named Johann Friedrich Diefenbach was a major proponent. In the 1840s, he developed a radical surgical procedure to treat stuttering. He would cut a wedge-shaped piece out of the back of the tongue and then sew the remaining parts back together. He believed this would correct the supposed defect in the tongue's motor function. The procedure was performed without modern anesthesia or antibiotics. It was incredibly bloody, excruciatingly painful, and fraught with risk. Patients were at high risk of bleeding to death, choking on their own blood, or developing a life-threatening infection. And it didn't work. Stuttering is not a problem with the tongue. It's a complex speech disorder that is thought to originate in the brain. It involves issues with timing, coordination, and neural processing related to speech production. Cutting a piece out of the tongue does absolutely nothing to address the root cause of the problem. While some patients may have experienced a temporary improvement due to the shock of the surgery or a strong placebo effect, the stutter almost always returned. In the meantime, the patient was left with a mutilated tongue, which could lead to permanent problems with speech, eating, and even taste. Diefenbach performed this surgery on a number of patients, and for a short time it was hailed as a breakthrough. Other surgeons in Europe and America began to adopt the practice, but the reports of failures, complications, and even deaths quickly began to pile up. The medical community soon realized that the procedure was not only ineffective, but also barbaric. It was a surgical solution for a non-surgical problem. The practice was abandoned within a few years, but it stands as a grim reminder of how a fundamental misunderstanding of a medical condition can lead to horrific and unnecessary treatments. Today, we understand that stuttering is a neurodevelopmental disorder. Treatment focuses on speech therapy, counseling, and techniques to manage fluency, not on surgery. The story of the tongue-splitting cure for stuttering is a stark example of the medical profession's capacity for well-intentioned but catastrophic error. The questions this history raises are deeply unsettling. How can the medical profession become so fixated on a purely physical cause for a condition, ignoring all other possibilities to the point of performing mutilating surgery? What does this say about our tendency to seek simple, concrete solutions for complex, invisible problems like neurological disorders? And what modern surgical procedures might we be performing today based on an incomplete understanding of a disease that will be viewed with similar horror by future generations? Number 4. What if standing in the sun was the only cure for a deadly disease? Today, we are warned about the dangers of sun exposure. We are told to wear sunscreen, cover up, and avoid the midday sun to reduce our risk of skin cancer. But a century ago, the sun was seen as a powerful medicine. A new treatment called heliotherapy or sun therapy became a popular and surprisingly effective cure for a dreaded disease, tuberculosis. Before the discovery of antibiotics, TB was a leading cause of death. It ravaged the lungs and could also infect the bones, joints, and skin, a form known as scrofula. There was no real cure. A diagnosis was often a death sentence. The idea that sunlight could be a healer is ancient. But the modern practice of heliotherapy was pioneered by a Swiss doctor named Auguste Rollier in the early 20th century. There are definitely no things Sun Tino 3. He opened a Sun Clinic Science Clinic high in the Swiss Alps in the town of Leysen. He believed that the clean mountain air and the intense high altitude sunlight had powerful healing properties. He developed a strict regimen for his patients, most of whom were suffering from non-pulmonary TB, like tuberculosis of the bone. The treatment was simple but methodical. Patients were gradually exposed to the sun, starting with just their feet for a few minutes. Over a period of weeks, the exposure was slowly increased, moving up the body, until the patient could spend several hours a day lying naked in the sun, even in the middle of winter. The only thing that remained covered was their head. Rollier's clinics were famous for their iconic images of patients, including children, lying on balconies in the snow, their bodies tanned a deep bronze, exposed to the cold air and the bright sun. And remarkably, it worked. Rollier reported incredibly high cure rates. The sunlight seemed to halt the progression of the disease. Wounds healed, bones mended, and patients who had arrived on stretchers were eventually able to walk again. How did it work? We now know that sunlight stimulates the body to produce vitamin D. Vitamin D is crucial for bone health and, importantly, for a properly functioning immune system. It's believed that the massive doses of vitamin D produced by this intense sun exposure supercharged the patient's immune systems, giving them the strength to fight off the tuberculosis bacteria. The clean air and good nutrition at the clinics also played a role. Heliotherapy became a global phenomenon, and sanatoriums based on Rollier's model were built in mountain and coastal areas all over the world. It was the first truly effective treatment for non-pulmonary TB, but it wasn't a perfect cure. It was less effective for the more common pulmonary form of the disease, and it was a slow, lengthy process, often requiring a stay of months or even years. The era of heliotherapy came to an end in the late 1940s with the discovery of the first antibiotic that could kill the tuberculosis bacterium streptomycin. A course of pills could now do what months of sunbathing had once achieved. The sun sanatoriums were quickly abandoned. The story of heliotherapy is a fascinating example of a natural, non-invasive treatment that was highly effective for its time. It's a reminder that sometimes the simplest things like sunlight can be powerful medicine. But this forgotten cure also leaves us with some challenging questions. In our modern indoor-oriented society, with our fear of the sun, are we depriving ourselves of the natural healing benefits of sunlight and contributing to problems like vitamin D deficiency? As we face the growing threat of antibiotic-resistant bacteria, could there be value in re-examining old, pre-antibiotic era treatments like heliotherapy? And how many other simple, natural, and effective cures have been forgotten or dismissed in our rush to embrace pharmaceutical and technological solutions? Number 3. Could starving yourself to death be a form of medicine? Fasting is a practice as old as humanity itself. It has been a part of religious and spiritual traditions for millennia. But in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a new and extreme version of fasting emerged, promoted as a medical cure for a wide range of diseases. This was the fasting cure movement. Its proponents argued that abstaining from all food for extended periods, sometimes for weeks or even months, could purge the body of toxins and cure chronic illness. It was a dangerous and often deadly practice based on a profound misunderstanding of human physiology. One of the most famous and controversial figures in this movement was Dr. Henry S. Tanner. In 1880, in New York City, Tanner undertook a highly publicized 40-day fast consuming only water. He did it to prove that the human body could survive for long periods without food, a claim that was widely disbelieved by the medical establishment at the time. And Tanner survived, and his stunt made him a celebrity. He became a champion of therapeutic fasting, arguing that it was a natural way for the body to heal itself. Another major promoter was Upton Sinclair, the famous author of The Jungle. In 1911, he wrote a book called The Fasting Cure, in which he detailed his own experiences with fasting and promoted it as a cure for everything from colds and asthma to tuberculosis and cancer. Sinclair and other advocates believed that digestion diverted the body's vital energy. By fasting, they argued, you freed up this energy to focus on healing and eliminating the accumulated poisons that were the root cause of all disease. People flocked to fasting sanatoriums where they would undergo supervised, prolonged fasts. These fasts were not gentle, they were extreme tests of endurance. Patients would consume only water for 20, 30, even 60 days or more. They would grow incredibly weak and emaciated. While some people reported feeling better after these fasts, likely due to the placebo effect or the resolution of a minor ailment, the practice was incredibly dangerous. Prolonged starvation can lead to muscle wasting, organ damage, heart failure, and death. There are numerous reports of patients dying during or shortly after undergoing a fasting cure. The theory behind it was pure pseudoscience. There is no evidence that the body accumulates toxins that can be purged by starvation. The human body has its own highly efficient detoxification systems, the liver and the kidneys. Starving the body doesn't help these organs, it harms them. While short-term, intermittent fasting is being studied today for potential health benefits, it is a world away from the extreme, prolonged starvation advocated by the fasting cure movement. The movement eventually faded as our understanding of nutrition and metabolism grew, but the underlying idea that you can detox your body through extreme dietary restrictions persists in many modern fads. The history of the fasting cure is a stark warning about the dangers of taking a simple concept to a deadly extreme. It forces us to ask some difficult questions. Why are we so drawn to the idea of purification through deprivation, whether it's through fasting, cleanses, or detox diets? How can charismatic but unqualified individuals so easily convince people to undertake dangerous and unproven medical treatments? And in a world saturated with wellness influencers promoting extreme diets, have we really learned anything from the deadly mistakes of the fasting cure movement? Number 2, would you drink a syrup made from crushed snails to cure a cough? In the long history of bizarre medical ingredients, snails hold a special slimy place. For centuries, from ancient Greece to 19th century Europe, snails and the slime they produce were considered a powerful medicine. They were used to treat a wide range of ailments, from skin conditions and wounds to serious internal diseases. The most common preparation was a snail syrup, a sweet, gooey concoction prescribed for coughs, bronchitis, and tuberculosis. The use of snails in medicine goes back at least to the time of Pliny the Elder in ancient Rome, who recommended them for treating pain. But the practice really flourished in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. Cookbooks and medical texts from the period are full of recipes for snail-based remedies. To make a snail syrup, you would typically take a large number of garden snails, sometimes with their shells, crush them, and mix them with sugar and water. The mixture would then be boiled down to create a thick syrup. Sometimes herbs or other ingredients would be added. It was sold in apothecaries and was a common household remedy for chest complaints. Why snails? The logic was likely based on the doctrine of signatures, an old belief that a plant or animal's appearance gave a clue to its medicinal use. The slow, phlegmatic nature of the snail and its slimy trail might have suggested that it could help with conditions involving phlegm and mucus in the chest. People believed the snail's essence could help soothe an irritated throat and loosen congestion. It wasn't just syrup, snails were used topically as well. The slime was thought to have healing properties for the skin. It was applied to treat wrinkles, warts, and burns. In some folk traditions, a live snail was placed on a wound with the belief that as the snail shriveled and died, it would draw the illness out of the body. There was even a belief that snails could help with hernias. A live snail would be poked until it secreted its slime onto the hernia, then it would be sealed in a bag and hung in a chimney. The belief was that as the snail wasted away, so would the hernia. Is there any science to this? Surprisingly, there might be a grain of truth. Modern research has shown that the slime of the common garden snail, Helix aspersa, contains a complex mix of substances, including glycoproteins, antioxidants, and peptides that have been shown to have wound healing and skin regenerating properties. This is why snail mucin has become a popular ingredient in high-end cosmetics today, especially in Korean beauty products. So, the ancient belief that snail slime was good for the skin wasn't entirely wrong. Whether a boiled down snail syrup had any real effect on a cough is much more doubtful. The high sugar content might have had a soothing, demulcent effect on the throat, similar to a modern cough drop, but any beneficial compounds from the snails would have likely been destroyed by the boiling process. The long history of snail medicine is a perfect example of how folk wisdom can sometimes stumble upon a biologically active substance, even if the reasoning behind it is completely flawed. It leaves us with some curious questions. How many other traditional remedies, dismissed by modern science as old wives' tales, might contain genuinely effective compounds that we are overlooking? What is the line between a traditional medicine with a real, albeit misunderstood, basis and pure magical thinking? And as we continue to mine the natural world for new drugs, should we be paying more attention to the slimy, creepy, and crawly things that our ancestors once saw as medicine? Number 1. Could a dead mouse solve your toothache? Of all the strange and disgusting remedies from the past, this one might be the hardest to stomach. In ancient Egypt and in parts of medieval Europe, a common cure for a toothache was a dead mouse. Not just any dead mouse, but a specially prepared one. The belief was that the essence of the mouse, when applied to the aching tooth, could relieve the pain. It represents a level of medical desperation that is hard for us to comprehend. The ancient Egyptians had a variety of dental problems, largely due to the grit and sand from stone-ground flour that wore down their teeth. When a tooth ached, one of the prescribed remedies, according to ancient texts, was to take a dead mouse, sometimes split in half, and place it on the sore tooth and gum. The mouse was to be left there until the pain subsided. It's not clear what the logic was. Perhaps it was a form of sympathetic magic, the idea that the life force of the mouse could counteract the death or decay of the tooth. The practice wasn't limited to Egypt. In Elizabethan England, a dead mouse was also considered a potent cure for various ailments. To cure warts, you were supposed to cut a mouse in half and apply it to the wart. For whooping cough, a popular remedy was mouse pie, a pie made with roasted mice. And for toothaches, the advice was to bite the head off a mouse. The famous English physician Thomas Muffet, writing in the 16th century, recommended a variety of mouse-based cures. The idea was not just to place the mouse on the tooth. In some traditions, the mouse was baked or burnt to ash, and the ash was then mixed with other ingredients to create a paste that was packed around the tooth. It's hard to imagine any scenario in which this would be effective. The pain of a toothache is caused by inflammation or infection of the nerve inside the tooth. Placing a dead mouse, or its ashes, on the outside of the tooth would do nothing to address the root cause. In fact, it would be an excellent way to introduce a host of dangerous bacteria into the mouth, leading to a much more serious infection. The use of a dead mouse as medicine is a powerful example of pre-scientific thinking. In a world without germ theory, without an understanding of anatomy or the true causes of disease, medicine was a mixture of observation, tradition, and a great deal of magical thinking. If someone tried a bizarre remedy like a dead mouse and their toothache happened to get better on its own a day later, they would credit the mouse. The story would be told and the cure would be passed down through generations. The many times it failed would be forgotten or ignored. This is perhaps the ultimate cringeworthy ancient treatment. It combines the macabre with the unsanitary in a way that perfectly illustrates how far medicine has come. We have moved from dead mice to root canals, from magical thinking to evidence-based science. But the history of the mouse cure should leave us with a sense of humility and some final shocking questions. What are the dead mice of our own time, the completely useless but widely believed health fads and remedies that we cling to out of desperation or tradition? How much of what we consider to be effective medicine today is simply a powerful placebo effect, our modern-day equivalent of a magical belief? And when future generations look back at our medical practices, what will make them cringe the most?